Hello everybody, welcome to the Aurora Public Library here for APL Munch Reads. So all of you guys voted on Facebook, and now I am here to read your favorite lunchtime short story excerpt. So today, all of you guys voted for The Yellow Wallpaper by landmark American feminist and socialist thinker Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So this is a pretty popular or well-known short story, although maybe some of you guys haven't actually read it, even though you've heard about it. And so this particular short story is about, we're basically reading from a secret diary of a young married woman who is suffering from what is probably depression, possibly even postpartum, but she describes it as a temporary nervous depression. A slight hysterical tendency is what she's been told that she has, and that was diagnosed by her husband, who is a physician of high standing, and so he prescribed this rest cure. And so basically we're reading through her diary as she's telling us about how she's basically living through her days as having a rest cure. So I will go ahead and get started. We're not going to read the entire thing today. I'm going to read about the first 10 pages, and then if you are interested and you liked hearing about this story, you can go check it out. This is available on our Hoopla app and also on Gutenberg if you just look online. So it's a free short story that you can read anytime you like. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate. I would say a haunted house and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I will proudly declare that there's something queer about it. Else, why should it be let so cheaply? And why have stood so long untenanted? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical in the extreme. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. John is a physician, and perhaps, and I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind, perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. You see, he does not believe I'm sick. And what can one do if a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there is really nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency? What is one to do? My brother is also a physician and also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics and journeys and air and exercise, and I'm absolutely forbidden to work until I am well again. Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? I did write for a while in spite of them, but it does exhaust me a good deal, having to be so sly about it, or else meet with heavy opposition. I sometimes fancy that in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus, but John says the very worst thing I can do is to think about my condition, and I confess it always makes me feel bad. So I will let it alone and talk about the house. The most beautiful place. It is quite alone, standing well back from the road, quite 3 miles from the village. It makes me think of English places that you read about, for there are hedges and walls and gates that lock, and lots of separate little houses for the gardeners and people. There is a delicious garden. I've never saw such a garden, large and shady, full of box-bordered paths and lined with long grape-covered arbors with seats under them. There were greenhouses too, but they were all broken now. There is some legal trouble, I believe, something about the heirs and the co-heirs. Anyhow, the place has been empty for years. That spoils my ghostliness, I'm afraid, but I don't care. There is something strange about the house. I can feel it. I even said so to John one moonlit evening, but he said what I felt was a draught and shut the window. I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I'm sure I never used to be so sensitive. I think it is due to this nervous condition. But John says if I feel so, I shall neglect my proper self-control, so I take pains to control myself, before him at least, and that makes me very tired. I don't like our room a bit. I want one downstairs that opened on the piazza and had roses all over the window and had such pretty old-fashioned chintz hangings. But John would not hear of it. He said there was only one window and not room for 2 beds, and no near room for him if he took another. He is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. I have a scheduled prescription for each hour in the day. He takes all care for me, and so I feel basically ungrateful not to value it more. He said we came here solely on my account, that I was to have perfect rest and all the air I could get. Your exercise depends on your strength, my dear, he said, and your food somewhat on your appetite, but air you can absorb all the time. So we took the nursery at the top of the house. It is a big, airy room, the whole floor nearly, with windows that look all ways, and air and sunshine galore. It was nursery first, and then playground and gymnasium, I should judge, for the windows are barred for little children, and there are rings and things in the wall. The paint and paper look as if a boys' school had used it. It is stripped off, the paper, in great patches all around the head of my bed, about as far as I can reach, and in a great place on the other side of the room down low. I never saw a worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin. It is dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study, and when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. The color is repellent, almost revolting, a smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded in the slow turning sunlight. It is a dull, yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulfur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. Here comes John. I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word. We have been here 2 weeks, and I haven't felt like writing before, since that first day. I'm sitting by the window now, up in this atrocious nursery, and there's nothing to hinder my writing as much as I please, save lack of strength. John is away all day, and even some nights when his cases are serious. But I am glad my case is not serious. But these nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. Of course, it is only nervousness. It does weigh on me so not to do my duty in any way. I mean, to be such a help to John, such a real rest and comfort, and here I am a comparative burden already. No one would believe what an effort it is to do what little I am able, to dress and entertain and order things. It is fortunate Mary is so good with the baby, such a dear baby, and yet I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. I suppose John never was nervous in his life. He laughs at me so about this wallpaper. I mean, at first he meant to repaper the room, but afterwards he said that I was letting it get the better of me and that nothing was worse for a nervous patient than to give way to such fancies. He said that after the wallpaper was changed, it would be the heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then that gate at the head of the stairs, and so on. You know the place is doing you good, he said. And really, dear, I don't care to renovate the house just for 3 months' rental. Then do let us go downstairs, I said. There are such pretty rooms down there. Then he took me in his arms and called me a blessed little goose, and he said he would go down to the cellar if I wished, and have it whitewashed into the bargain. But he is right enough about the beds and the windows and things. It is an airy and comfortable room, as any one need wish, and of course I would not be so silly as to make him uncomfortable just for a whim. I'm really getting quite fond of the big room, all but that horrid paper. Out of one window I could see the garden, those mysterious, deep-shaded arbors, the riotous, old-fashioned flowers and bushes and gnarly trees. Out of another I get a lovely view of the bay and a little private wharf belonging to the estate. There is a beautiful shaded lane that runs down there from the house. I always fancy I see people walking in there, these numerous paths and arbors, but John has cautioned me not to give way to fancy in the least. He says that with my imaginative power and a habit of story-making, a nervous weakness like mine is sure to lead to all manner of excited fancies, and that I ought to use my will and good sense to check the tendency. So I try. I think sometimes that if I were only well enough to write a little, it would relieve the press of ideas and rest me. But I find I get pretty tired when I try. It is so discouraging not to have any advice and companionship about my work. When I get well, John says he will ask Cousin Henry and Julia down for a long visit, but he says he would as soon put fireworks in my pillowcase as to let me have those stimulating people about now. I wish I could get well faster. But I must not think that. This paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. There is a recurrent spot where the pattern lolls like a broken neck and two bulbous eyes stare at you upside down. I get positively angry with the impertinence of it and the everlastingness. Up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd, unblinking eyes are everywhere. There is one place where two breaths didn't match, and eyes go all up and down the line, one a little higher than the other. I never saw so much expression in an inanimate thing before, and we all know how much expression they have. I used to lie awake as a child and get more entertainment and terror out of blank walls and plain furniture than most children could find in a toy store. I remember what a kindly wink the knobs of our old big bureau used to have, and there was one chair that always seemed like a strong friend. I used to feel that if any of the other things looked too fierce, I could always hop into that chair and be safe. The furniture in this room is no worse than inharmonious, however, for we had to bring it all from downstairs. I suppose when this used to be a playroom, they had to take the nursery things out, and no wonder. I never saw such ravages as the children have made here. The wallpaper, as I said before, is torn off in spots, and it sticketh closer than a brother. They must have had perseverance as well as hatred. Then the floor is scratched and gouged and splintered. The plaster itself is dug out here and there, and this great heavy bed, which is all we found in the room, looks as if it had been through wars. But I don't mind a bit. Only the paper. Here comes John's sister. Such a dear girl she is, and so careful of me. I must not let her find me writing. She is a perfect and enthusiastic housekeeper, and hopes for no better profession. I verily believe she thinks it is the writing which makes me sick. But I can write when she is out and see her a long way off from these windows. There is one that commands the road, a lovely shaded winding road, and one that looks off over the country, a lovely country too, full of great elms and velvet meadows. This wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it in certain lights, and not clearly then. But in the places where it isn't faded, and where the sun is just so, I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure that seems to sulk about behind that silly and conspicuous front design. There's a sister on the stairs. Well, the 4th of July is over. The people are gone and I am tired out. John thought it might do me good to see a little company, so we had just Mother and Nellie and the children down for a week. Of course, I didn't do a thing. Jenny sees to everything now. But it tires me all the same. John says if I don't pick up faster, he shall send me to Weir Michel in the fall. But I don't want to go there at all. I had a friend who was in his hands once, and she says he is just like John and my brother, only more so. Besides, it is such an undertaking to go so far. I don't feel as if it is worth while to turn my hand over for anything, and I'm getting dreadfully fretful and querulous. I cry at nothing, and I cry most of the time. Of course, I don't when John is here, or anybody else, but when I'm alone. And I'm alone a great deal now. John is kept in town very often by serious cases, and Jenny is good and lets me alone when I want her to. So I walk a little in the garden, or down that lovely lane, sit on the porch under the roses, and lie up here a good deal. I'm getting really fond of the room in spite of the wallpaper. Perhaps because of the wallpaper. It dwells on my mind so. I'll lie here on this great immovable bed, it is nailed down, I believe, and follow that pattern about by the hour. It is good as gymnastics, I assure you. I start, we'll say, at the bottom, down in the corner over there where it has not been touched, and I determine for the 1,000th time that I will follow that pointless pattern to some sort of conclusion. And I know little of the principles of design, and I know this thing was not arranged on any law of radiation, or alternation, or repetition, or symmetry, or anything else that I've ever heard of. It is repeated, of course, by the breaths, but not otherwise. Looked at it in one way, each breath stands alone, the bloated curves and flourishes, a kind of debased Romanesque, with delirium tremens, go waddling up and down in isolated columns of fatuity. But on the other hand, they connect diagonally, and the sprawling outlines run off in great slanting waves of optic horror, like a lot of wallow seaweeds in full chase. The whole thing goes horizontally too, at least it seems so, and I exhaust myself in trying to distinguish the order of it going in that direction. They have used a horizontal breath for frieze, and that adds wonderfully to the confusion. There is one end of the room where it is almost intact, and there, when the crosslight fades and the low sun shines directly upon it, I can almost fancy radiation after all. The interminable grotesque seems to form around a common center and rush off in headlong plunges of equal distraction. It makes me tired to follow it. I will take a nap, I guess. I don't know why I should write this. I don't want to. I don't feel able. And I know John would think it absurd, but I must say what I feel, and I think in some way it is such a relief. But the effort is getting to be greater than the relief. Half the time I am awfully lazy and lie down ever so much. John says I mustn't lose my strength and has given me cod liver oil and a lot of tonics and things, to say nothing of ale and wine and rare meat. Dear John, he loves me so very dearly and hates to have me sick. I tried to have a real, earnest, reasonable talk with him the other day and tell him how I wish he would let me go and make a visit to Cousin Henry and Julia. But he said I wasn't able to go, nor able to stand it after I got there, and I did not make a very good case for myself, for I was crying before I had finished. It is getting to be a great effort for me to think straight, just this nervous weakness, I suppose. And dear John gathered me up in his arms and just carried me upstairs and laid me on the bed and sat by me and read to me till it tired my head. He said I was his darling and his comfort and all he had, and that I must take care of myself for his sake and keep well. He says no one but myself can help me out of it, that I must use my will and self-control and not let any silly fancies run away with me. There's one comfort: the baby is well and happy, and does not have to occupy this nursery with the horrid wallpaper. If he had not used it, that blessed child would have. What a fortunate escape! Why, I wouldn't have a child of mine, an impressionable little thing, live in such a room for worlds. I never thought of it before, but it is lucky that John kept me here after all. I can stand it so much easier than a baby, you see. Of course, I never mention it to them any more. I'm too wise, but I keep watch of it all the same. There are things in that paper that nobody knows but me, or ever will. Behind that outside pattern, the dim shapes get clear every day. It is always the same shape, only very numerous. And it is like a woman stooping down and creeping about behind the paper. I don't like it a bit. I begin to think, I wish John would take me away from here. It is so hard to talk with John about my case, because he is so wise and because he loves me so. But I tried it last night. It was moonlight. The moon shines in all around, just as the sun does. I hate to see it sometimes. It creeps so slowly and always comes in by one window or another. John was asleep, and I hated to waken him, so I kept still and watched the moonlight on that undulating paper till I felt creepy. The faint figure behind seemed to shake the pattern as if she wanted to get out. I got up softly and went to feel and see if the paper did move, and when I came back, John was awake. "What is it, little girl?" he said. "Don't go walking about like that. You'll get cold." I thought it was a good time to talk, so I told him that I really was not gaining here, and that I wished he would take me away. "Why, darling," he said, "our lease will be up in 3 weeks, and I can't see how to leave before then. The repairs are not done at home, and I can't possibly leave town just now. Of course, if you were in any danger, I could and would, but you really are better, dear, whether you can see it or not. I'm a doctor, dear, and I know. You're getting flesh and color, and your appetite is better. I feel really much easier about you." "I don't weigh a bit more," said I, "nor as much. My appetite may be better in the evening when you're here, but it is worse in the morning when you're away." "Bless her little heart," he said with a big hug. "She shall be as sick as she pleases, But now let's improve the shining hours by going to sleep and talk about it in the morning. And you won't go away? I asked gloomily. Why? How can I, dear? It's only 3 weeks more, and then we will take a nice little trip of a few days while Jenny is getting the house ready. Really, dear, you're so much better. Better in body, perhaps, I began, and stopped short, for he sat up and looked at me with such a stern, reproachful look that I could not say another word. My darling, he said, I beg of you, for my sake and our child's sake, as well as for your own, that you will never for one instant let that idea enter your mind. There is nothing so dangerous, so fascinating to a temperament like yours. It is a false and foolish fancy. Can you not trust me as a physician when I tell you so? So, of course, I said no more on that score and went to sleep before long. He thought I was asleep first, but I wasn't. I lay there for hours trying to decide whether that front pattern and the back pattern really did move together or separately. On a pattern like this, by daylight, there is a lack of sequence, a defiance of law that is a constant irritant to a normal mind. The color is hideous enough and unreliable enough and infuriating enough, but the pattern is torturing. You think you have mastered it, but just as you get well underway in a following, it turns a back somersault, and there you are. It slaps you in the face, knocks you down, and tramples you. It is like a bad dream. The outside pattern is a florid arabesque, reminding one of a fungus. If you can imagine a toadstool in joints, an interminable string of toadstools, budding and sprouting in endless convolutions, why, that is something like that. That is sometimes. There is one marked peculiarity about this paper, a thing nobody seems to notice but myself, and that is it changes as the light changes. When the sun shoots in through the east window, I always watch for that first long, straight ray. It changes so quickly that I can never quite believe it. That is why I watch it always. By moonlight, the moon shines in all night when there is moon. I wouldn't know it was the same paper. At night, in any kind of light, in twilight, candlelight, lamplight, and worst of all, by moonlight, it becomes bars. The outside pattern, I mean, and the woman behind it, as plain as can be. I didn't realize for a long time what the thing was that showed behind, that dim sub-pattern, but now I'm quite sure it is woman. By daylight, she is subdued, quiet. I fancy it is a pattern that keeps her so still. It is so puzzling. It keeps me quiet by the hour. I lie down ever so much now. John says it is good for me and to sleep all I can. Indeed, he started the habit by making me lie down for an hour after each meal. It is a very bad habit, I'm convinced, for you see I don't sleep. And that cultivates deceit, for I don't tell them I'm awake. Oh no. The fact is, I'm getting a little afraid of John. He seems very queer sometimes, and even Jenny has an inexplicable look. It strikes me occasionally, just as a scientific hypothesis, that perhaps it is the paper. I have watched John when he did not know I was looking, and come into the room suddenly on the most innocent excuses, and I've caught him several times looking at the paper. And Jenny, too. I caught Jenny with her hand on it once. She didn't know I was in the room, and when I asked her in a very quiet voice, with the most restrained manner possible, what she was doing with the paper, she turned around as if she had been caught stealing and looked quite angry, asked me why I should frighten her so. Then she said that the paper stained everything it touched, that she had found yellow smudges on my clothes and John's, and she wished we would be more careful. Did not that sound innocent? But I know she was studying that pattern, and I'm determined that nobody shall find it out but myself. Life is very much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I have something more to expect, to look forward to watch. I really do eat better, and I am more quiet than I was. John is so pleased to see me improved. He laughed a little the other day, and I said I seemed to be flourishing in spite of my wallpaper. I turned it off with a laugh. I had no intention of telling him it was because of the wallpaper. He would make fun of me. He might even want to take me away. I don't want to leave now until I have found out. There is a week more, and I think that will be enough. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed that excerpt from The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. To give you a little bit of context about this short story, like I know I didn't read the whole thing, and I really encourage everybody to read it. Like I feel like you really get a sense of what it feels like to suffer from depression, from a mental illness, and not being taken seriously. So this story, when it first came out, it caused huge waves, because before then, to give some perspective, that time period, it was a time of the U.S. when it was published in 1892. So the U.S. was just industrializing. They were basically still kind of going into the Western frontier. Like they still had that mentality of like, let's go out west and like conquer all these lands. There was a brief depression right after this was published, actually, so in 1983. So right after this was published, America was kind of plunged in like a depression. And so it caused some hard times. And it was also a time where various groups of people were fighting for their rights. And so it was after the Civil War, about a generation after the Civil War. So African Americans were fighting for their civil liberties. Like it was starting to build up steam, even though it wouldn't happen for, I want to say 60, 70 years after that. But it was also the time during the women's suffrage movement. And so women were trying to gather up, were trying to fight for their right to vote. On equal standing as men. Of course, it was only white women, so it didn't count for all women, but it was a period of time where different groups of people were trying to fight for their civil liberties, basically. And so during this time period, the view towards mental health was like poor in comparison of what it is today. So during that time period, especially for women, women were seen as lesser. So they were seen as weak and sickly, and a lot of that came from a kind of Victorian attitude where women had to be morally upright, they had to be docile, they had to be orderly. So all of those kind of mentalities of what you would think being a Victorian woman were, like women were supposed to live up to that ideal. And so one thing that was really interesting is that during that time period, if women wanted to work, if women wanted to get an education, it was seen as, if you did those things, if you even tried to like think like a man would, that it could cause hysteria. So during that excerpt when I was reading, the author briefly mentions Mitchell, a Dr. Mitchell, and so he was actually a real person during that time period who was an expert in women's mental health. And he had what you would call a rest cure, and so that's what kind of the author is going through in this short story, where you weren't allowed to do anything. You were basically just supposed to lay there and even avoid thinking if you could, and that would help women was supposedly supposed to bring women back to their natural state of not thinking and being docile, and that would make them happy. So it was like this hysteria was causing them to be unhappy, and that if they did nothing, they would be back to happy. So you see a lot of this. I think the short story is actually partly autobiographical. So Charlotte Perkins Gilman, after she bore her first child, she suffered from depression, which probably now we would say it's probably postpartum. And so she was recommended to go see Dr. Mitchell, actually, and she was prescribed this rest cure. And so while she went through this, she ended up dropping out just because she said that it felt like it was making her half mad. So it was basically driving her insane just to sit there and do nothing with her time. Like she couldn't write, and obviously she was a very good writer, so taking her away from her hobbies and her passions was not helping at all. Nowadays we would say, yes, of course, that definitely doesn't help at all. Let's see. There's one really interesting, so Dr. Mitchell, part of his rest cure, one of his ideas was that if modern girls stop wanting things, basically, if you stop wanting an education, if you stop wanting to work, if you stop wanting to do these things, that you would be happy, and by stopping wanting things, that would make you happy. So it was a really interesting idea that was just coming out from that time. So basically this short story was a statement against this view of mental illness, and it was a statement against the patriarchy, because a lot of when you're reading the story, you can see how influential her husband is in her life, where he's like, oh no, you can't do these things, and even when she tries to talk to him about it, he doesn't listen, and he doesn't take her seriously. And so this story, when it came out, it was basically very shocking, where it was like, oh, like, here's this woman, and she is suffering, and it was shining a light on how people viewed mental illness, and like it fueled the fire of women's suffrage, the women's suffrage movement. So that's why it is such a well-known short story, even though you might not have particularly read it. So I recommend that you guys all read the ending. It starts getting a lot more interesting as you get closer to the end. You might have seen snapshots of what the ending is supposed to be like, just because it is such a popular feminist icon, I want to say the short story is. So definitely check out the ending, and then join us next month for our next Munch Reads. And if you'd like, we are doing our next Reader's Corner next week, and we're reading... check out our Facebook page for the book we're reading. We're going to have discussion questions on there. And so you could read the book, answer the discussion questions, or just tune in for Reader's Corner. So I hope you guys all have a great day.